Hello, everyone, and welcome. I have a couple of just basic announcements before we get started. I want to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Eric Perry. I am the social media coordinator and webmaster for ACEs. I'm also a clinical faculty member at Southern New Hampshire University in the online clinical mental health counseling program. I'm joined by Dr. Marty Jencius, and I'll give him a second to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Marty Jencius, and I'm mixing up an Arnold Palmer, which up until about a year ago, when I heard people order those things, I thought it was an alcoholic mixed drink, or a mixed drink with alcohol, I guess. But it's simply iced tea and lemonade, and I've been enjoying them. So that helps me get through a lot of meetings, and this will be helpful too. This is really a meeting where we're hoping to use the collective knowledge of the group for ideas that you're using to take your teaching online, things that you've learned, things that you're trying out. And as a result, hopefully we'll find that you'll be giving ideas as well as getting ideas from people. And so we want your questions. Eric and I don't know all the answers, and there are probably people who on this forum that know the answers from their experience with a platform that we haven't had experience with. So let's go ahead and see if there are some questions that are coming up, things that we can start with, things that came up in our previous forum that we'll share with you also. But let's see what you have.
So if you have a question or you want to share, and we can unmute your mic and let you join the conversation, feel free to post in the chat and we will take a look and get you on here to speak with us. I'd like the leave a penny, take a penny that Marty had put in the chat. We really want this to be an experience where we're able to share and give each other ideas, support, and guidance as we move through this process. So there's a question on here that asks about Canvas and the platform Big Blue Button, which we heard about a little bit in our last webinar earlier today. If anyone has specific experience that they'd like to share with it, I have experience with Zoom, with software called Bongo, UCU, and Blue Jeans. So if there's anyone that has experience with Big Blue Button, we'd love to hear from you.
And we can activate your microphones if you want to share the Big Blue Button.
All right, so we'll hang on to that one for a little bit. If anybody wants to join and tell us a little bit about that, they can. I see that there's a couple of questions about HIPAA compliance. And this is something that we talked about a good bit in the last webinar and was a big question. When we're looking at some of these platforms, there are options to make the platform HIPAA compliant. Zoom is one example. Zoom is HIPAA compliant. Also, if you have a video tool embedded in your LMS, it is likely HIPAA compliant, although you do want to double check on that. A couple of things to be mindful of is the ability to download recordings and how those can be shared. A lot of the integrated tools within an LMS, a learning management system like Blackboard, Canvas, or Desire to Learn, Brightspace, is that those videos are then stored there. They're not available anywhere else, and you can control whether or not they're downloaded. So there's less concern there of information being shared that you don't want to be shared. So it's really best to take a look at what you have access to currently through your university or otherwise, through your learning management system or LMS, and that can help you get started. Anything you wanted to add to that one, Marty?
I think you have to be sensitive to what are you having in terms of your discussions. We had some folks who were like, well, I want them to do case presentations on their clients that they're seeing at their internship site. And should they record those? Well, no, maybe you want to say with a self-contained sort of, you want to have them change their, make sure they're using pseudonyms, things like that to protect it. Um, the HIPAA compliant and the FERPA compliant issue is a large concern for people. See something that just popped up in the chat room, that Zoom has a HIPAA compliant option as long as your university or site has purchased the BAA agreement with that as part of the option, because we did some researching on that. The standard version is not HIPAA compliant. You have the option to switch your videos to encryption, and that's something that you can do with Zoom, so things are encrypted, and that helps a lot with that process. But that would be something you'd want to be concerned about, and possibly looking at how you're going to do sensitive information using these types of video platforms.
And somebody had asked here, Marty, what's the benefit of using an LMS video platform versus YouTube? The platform that's built into your LMS is designed for your students to be able to access it. It allows you to post, edit, to respond to having this tracked within a learning environment. There's a lot of advantages to using the video system that's included with your learning management system that you might not always think about, right? You can also have, we talked a lot in the last webinar about accessibility. So it's viewable by other members of your institution who can go in and take a look and tell you whether or not those videos are accessible and what you need to do to get them there. Right, so there's a lot of advantages of having those in the LMS. Another point that was brought up that is really, really applicable, you want to be sure to have some system to back those up should your LMS be shifted. Although generally when that happens, having been a part of that several times as an instructional designer and a faculty member, when those LMS shifts happen, those files should be backed up prior to the shift occurring. But it may take some, digging and pushing on your part to make sure that those video resources stick around, say if you're moving from Blackboard to Brightspace or something of that nature.
Lots of things coming up quickly. We're trying to, getting lots of questions about the possibility of these things breaching confidentiality. That's a decision you're going to have to make, the best decision you can. I have a tendency to err more on the safe side. So if you are concerned about people having access to sensitive information or sensitive videos, I would say that's probably not the platform or the option for you to use. So I'm just looking at the comments that are coming up in terms of trying to assure these kinds of regulations.
Yeah, I mean, generally the video resources and what we use them for, we don't use them for client information. So like Marty said, if there's some type of case conceptualization or presentation or supervision happening, that's not something that we record and store. That's something that we use, for example, a Zoom HIPAA-based, HIPAA-compliant platform to do synchronously, and there's no recording kept. So confidentiality doesn't become an issue, at least in that regard. But there are considerations to make as well. If your students are doing real plays instead of role plays, and they're posting those and recording those as skills demonstrations, you need to be mindful of letting them know who can see that and who might potentially have access to it as part of your informed consent and confidentiality during the course, right? Right.
There's a question I'm going to go to, which is a sort of a general question. I will teach, this is from Asima, I will teach online tomorrow for the very first time. I plan to use Blackboard Collaborate, a platform available through our university. I wonder what general suggestions you have for setting expectations online. I would encourage you to be patient. If you have the opportunity, give your students a trial time. I'm using Zoom for a lot of my courses, and as a result of using Zoom for that kind of interactivity, I opened up my office hours and gave them all an opportunity to try it out for them to be comfortable with their video and audio in that process. So I know it's tomorrow, but the idea, if you're introducing a new technology, not only to yourself, but for your students, it's always good to give them a trial run if you can do it. Try and set your, if it's your first time, try and set your expectations moderate to low in terms of what you're going to accomplish, because people will still be trying to navigate this new way of doing things. So be patient with yourself and don't try to overplan your class. Eric?
Yeah, so I think about some of the basic standards of online teaching, and my program is primarily online, and I supervise a fair amount of adjuncts as a part of my course lead duties, and I think about the types of things that we tell them to be mindful of, that the communication medium has changed. You want to make sure that you're responsive to emails, that you're available for support. So don't leave anything sitting in your inbox for more than a day. Um, you want to make sure that you're responsive to those students, that they still feel supported and engaged, even when they're not right in front of you. Um, and I know that's aside from the collaborate part. Netiquette becomes something that you want to make sure that students know about, how to communicate online. Even in synchronous meetings, sometimes students get this sense of anonymity. Even if their video's up and they're sharing that as a part of the experience, behavior changes. So you want to make sure they're familiar with how their dispositions and how their behaviors that they present are going to be gauged by those in the course and yourself as the instructor. So those are all things to keep in line, even just those basic communicative things. Talked a little bit in the last webinar about announcements, course announcements and communications. You can plot and plan those ahead of time, set those and schedule those out, particularly, I'm thinking about Canvas, um, Desire to Learn, and Blackboard all allow you to set up this structure of guidance and support that can go out on its own throughout the course. So I spend a lot of time putting those messages together so that students hear from me regularly and that they have that support and guidance in terms of what's going on with the course and what types of questions they might have as they try to navigate particular assignments.
Yeah, one of the things I thought about, because we were told last Tuesday the university was shutting down and we had to be prepared to go online this Monday with classes. And that's not I mean, that requires a lot of work. It's not a big lift for me because I've experienced doing that. But for a lot of folks, it's going to be. And then I had to stop thinking about not am I going to get through this week, but how am I going to get through the next 3 weeks, given that I might catch the virus and I'll be incapacitated. So that means I have to prepare not just to teach tomorrow, but I should start to think about preparing how to teach for the next couple of weeks, even if I'm not available. So using tools in LMS that Eric has suggested where you can launch different parts of your class as the time rolls around, and having that set aside ahead of time, I think is real important. I'm starting to capture some of the questions, Eric. One of the questions, I'll go with this one, is to think about. This is from Damian Sweeney. I represent school counselors. Do you recommend Google Voice and Google Hangout? to host phone calls with students' families as long as counselors aren't recording? Do you have any sense of that?
As a general rule, I don't, because there's particular issues with those softwares, right? Because this is still something that would be considered HIPAA protected, um,
Yeah.
even in a school environment. Um, and these technologies aren't going to provide the level of encryption or are not a HIPAA compliant software. Um, so if this is something that you plan on doing, um, you really want to make sure that you can control it. Um, by that I mean, that there's no option to record, that it is HIPAA compliant, um, that it meets the needs and is also accessible for students and families, which can be another barrier sometimes. Um, so I don't know if that's helpful, but it wouldn't be something I would tend to do. I would lean more towards trying to secure a software or a platform in which you could control some of those actions.
And I guess I would wonder if you're having conversations with phone calls to students and families, why aren't you using a cell phone to do it? And then you get around the whole HIPAA issue.
Yeah, it just seems easier. I mean, even I'm a techie, so I love the technological solution part. But I mean, if you needed to have multiple people on the call, just have multiple people on the call, right? It may be easier to go with something that's not web-based, something where there's not that risk of something being recorded, and kind of avoids that HIPAA issue.
Another question in terms of sort of best rules for doing online contact with clients. And I will go ahead and post to the chat room something that came out in the last group was that APA has resources for telemental health. And there's a link for telemental health, including a checklist of things that you should be aware of. There's also an author, and I can't remember her name at this point, but we will get this posted for you, that has a example of um, as a statement that she gives, informed consent that she gives to clients when she's working with them online. So we'll make sure and have that link to that resource posted for you. Gives you some ideas to tip your clients off in terms if you're going to be working with that. I mean, we're dealing with, in this form, we're really dealing with online instruction. Part of that is the whole thing with internship and practicum, and some of these guidelines might be helpful in doing that. Um, so we see some tips about telling students that you'll be able to respond to them to emails. And you had suggested in a previous conversation that this is a little different, that you need to look at maybe responses within 24 hours.
Yeah,
And
I
that
mean,
might be a reason.
I at the same time, you need to have boundaries, and somebody talked a little bit about that here. I'm still having dinner. I'm still, doing homework and playing with my kids in the evenings. I do make sure that my students know my general hours of availability, so that they have an idea when they might expect a response from me. It's good not to be. You don't want to be answering emails 10, 11 o'clock at night when you're supposed to be engaging in self-care, particularly now. So that's something that you want to be really attentive to at the same time. My story was kind of born out of walking into a meeting with fellow counselor educators and glancing at someone's computer and seeing like 300 emails on the screen. At which point my heart just kind of like sank in my chest. Um, it's different in an online environment because they're not going to have you at a predisposed time every week in some circumstances, particularly if you're doing a lot of asynchronous kind of stuff.
Yeah, there was a question that came up about sort of I mean, how do you keep people attended and focused online than in a classroom? And for some of us, keeping them attentive in a classroom is a challenge enough. but what can they sustain? I mean, some we have a report. Aleph talks about how students have a hard time maintaining focus online, and that's not there for everybody. It's not a medium that everybody is drawn to. I mean, we're addressing a lot of concerns from people who come from traditional brick and mortar, which is where I teach. And so, what kind of thinking do you have to do in changing your teaching and learning that you can expect in an online with students? And what tips might you have?
Yeah, and I mean, it makes me think a lot about just the pedagogy and instructional design behind some of the things that we're doing. And when we look at asynchronous resources like videos, the standard guidance around this is that adults can hold their attention on an asynchronous activity for 8 to 11 minutes, and that's probably even really high. And we've seen this, just explosion of just-in-time trainings and these really short and brief modules of learning in other training atmospheres and in the public domain. Um, the same happens in online education. Part of what we should be doing is making sure that these asynchronous activities are limited, right? When you can engage someone, when you can have them as part of the conversation, as you would in a lecture or in a classroom, there's different things that you can do to keep them involved. A lot of the softwares out there for synchronous activities encompass some of that. This software that we're using now, we could do polls and tests and call on folks and have them raise hands, and there's a lot of different tools that we can use to help engage uh, our our students as they're attending these synchronous activities. But we have to think about this in terms of what's going to keep them attentive, right? So just something to think about in terms of planning your courses and your activities and the types of things students might be engaging in.
One of the questions from Donna Hickman was, what's the best tool that you've used to facilitate online discussion with your students? I find it always frustrating I found it frustrating to have students have to write blogs and discussion posts. Instead, what I've used is VoiceThread, and I think you might want to look into that in terms of what as an application. And what it does is it allows students to respond through recording an audio or voice response. It allows students to record a video and a video response and a auditory response. They can do pictures. It can be a linear thread. It can be a thread where they can comment on other students' comments. Somebody asked what platform is VoiceThread? VoiceThread is available on all platforms. If you VoiceThread, and it's there in the chat room, and voicethread.com will get you started there. And what it does is you set it up and you do your initial recording or prompt for a question, and then you can either send out a link to all of your students who will then be able to go into VoiceThread and use it. There's no cost from students. Somebody also recommended Flipgrid. That's another platform similar to VoiceThread, which is good. That's coming up. So other than and I've never been, I had great affection for reading people's blog posts, students' blog posts. And I know some faculty have rubrics that they put together to assess the grade on the particular blog post. And then what happens is you have people's comments all sounding the same. Because they're trying to meet the rubric. They're not trying to have the conversation or engage in the idea. So the ideas that have come up, I suggested VoiceThread. Charity suggested, Jessica suggested Flipgrid. Charity's used it. These are all great platforms to take a look at for that kind of facilitating online discussions.
Yeah, and I mean all of those are great. I haven't had a chance to look at Flipgrid yet. I'm interested to look at that one. Also, keep in mind that your LMSs, your learning platforms may have some ability to do this. We use Bongo, which is formerly known as UCU at Southern New Hampshire University, and all of our discussions are video based. Um, so that it's asynchronous, but they give their video posts, they can give text or video responses, and it allows for um, just a more engaging discussion than kind of your asynchronous discussion board post type scenarios. And there are options to do this without an add-in that you can do native within Desire to Learn, within Canvas and within Blackboard. They're just not as user friendly as having something that's truly dedicated to that purpose.
A comment came up about Zoom and breakouts. One of the things that we stumbled across is if you have a simple, regular, personal Zoom account, then you can't do breakouts. If your university has a institutional account, which is a bit more costly, then that allows you to have multiple room monitors and you can do breakout rooms. I'm facing that with my group class in the sense that I don't have that university account, but I am using it. I'm going between that and Collaborate. Just the last time I attempted to use Collaborate, that required so many plugins, being a Mac guy, that it was dissuading for me to want to use it. But with Zoom, I'm running a group class that has 3 separate groups. So they have all been segmented to a 1 hour period of time that they'll be doing their group, because I can't have the rooms running at the same time. But if you have an institutional account, you're able to break into small groups, and that would be more uh, that would make the interaction a lot more simultaneous for folks. Another thing that we're facing, at least at our institution, is that if your class meets on Thursday from 4:25 to 7:10, you can't do synchronous meetings outside of that framework. That is the time that the students have traditionally set aside for class. And so you can't shift around those classes for different times. So we have to compress that synchronous stuff within the 3 hour period of time.
Yeah, and somebody had asked too, Marty, about accessibility, and this is a topic that we spent a good amount of time on in the last webinar. Um, there's a lot of different options to look at in terms of providing captioning and different resources and programs. Uh, you know, one of the first conversations you should have is with your Office of Accessibility, your accessibility officer, if you have one, any support staff who are involved in that process, who can help you ensure that the items that you place in your course and the activities that you're going to engage in are accessible to students. You don't want your first call from that office to be someone can't access or can't engage with your material or assignment. Your university is likely to have resources ready and available to you that you can use to support that student. But you really have to kind of take that step to access it. We talked a little bit about YouTube and how YouTube can provide some captioning. Someone here had mentioned that Zoom will also auto-transcribe any recording, but it doesn't help you synchronously. So these are all things to keep in mind in terms of planning those activities and how you might need to take some extra steps to make sure they're accessible to all of your students.
Um, Deborah or Shannon asked Deborah, with Zoom Pro or Zoom Rooms, how do you break them up into small groups? You were saying that, from what you can tell from the administrative account, certain levels, certain paid services with Zoom will allow you to have multiple group managers, and that way create multiple groups.
Yeah, there's an enterprise and a small business. I think you'd likely have an enterprise account if it was something being used by an entire university, but you'd want to go to check to see what your level of your account level is before you attempted to break out into different rooms, because they'd all need an administrator to be open.
To go back to the question of accessibility, I ran into this week when I had a class on Tuesday that I had two people who were getting support through the Student Accessibility Services to take an exam. And then Tuesday at 4 o'clock, the university shut down, so I couldn't give that exam to face-to-face to the rest of the class. So I started looking for online online test services, because I know Blackboard has testing built in, but if anybody's used Blackboard testing in the chat room, it is, and to my experience, the bane of my existence. So I started to look for other services to be able to do online tests. And this service, I wind up paying 20 bucks for the month or two that I'm going to be out, classmarker.com. Very user friendly. And I just typed it to the organizers. Let me put it the whole audience. The classmarker.com is what I've switched. I had two exams next week, or this last week, because of midterms. And so I've had to go ahead and switch them over to this platform. And my doc students working in both of those have tested those out for me, and they say it really works well. So that would be an option. In this case, this student wanted and needed extended time to take the exam. And so I was able to build that into the clock for her.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Marty, this is available in the LMS. At the same time, it can be really cumbersome. I can speak to D2L. It is not an easy process to develop any type of test or quiz. Third-party
Yeah,
tools
this
really
class
are helpful.
marker was like just doing an online survey. Paste it in, choose your response, choose the points you want for that response, and then go on to the next question. It was really quite user friendly.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to give it a shot.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anybody who wanted to jump on and share a little bit with the group? If so, please feel free to mention it in the chat, and we can make your mic live, and you can join the conversation.
Yeah, whether you have something to ask or whether you have something to share. We had folks in previous webinars come up and join in, and that was great.
Okay, so Damien, I'm going to go ahead and get your mic unmuted here, and you should be able to unmute yourself and speak whenever you're ready.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
We can, yes, sir.
Awesome. Okay, as I was mentioning, I'm a resource for school counselors in Kentucky who are also looking for answers. They want to provide this continuity of services. So I heard you say that that they could offer, phone calls to families and students. Some of them would be concerned about like just giving out their cell phone number to, just to everybody. So would you recommend like Google Voice for something like that?
I don't know. I think so. Are they taking incoming calls?
Kind of, because so in Kentucky, all schools are out for the next several weeks
Mm-hmm.
in terms of public schools. And they're really advised to telecommute. So many are working from home. So one suggestion that we had was, offering like Google Form appointments. So, students or families could make appointments with them. Then they can reach out to that family via whatever platform they're using. So that's kind of where we are right now. I just want to make sure that that we're advising them well.
Yeah, I mean, Paula had looks like it's just an organizer only comment, and she said that Google can give you a phone number that will forward to your own phone. you can do that certainly, but there are also tools like a Zoom-based platform called Ring Central that essentially gives you a computer-based line that's HIPAA compliant. So there's different ways that you can go about doing that so that they can take incoming calls. Outgoing calls can be blocked,
Okay,
so that's not as much of a concern. But those incoming calls would worry me a little bit more. If they're just using Google Forms to request an appointment, again, you need to make sure that they're not entering any information there that would be, considered confidential. And just the
sure.
fact that they're entering it to request an appointment may be the need for it to be HIPAA compliant and protected. So it's a tough hurdle to jump through, but you might have to look at some softwares that are going to help you manage that and may incur some additional cost. Marty, did you have any ideas aside from that?
I have a second line that is taps into my same phone. It's a virtual telephone line. I don't know if it's HIPAA compliant, but Jory on the chat room said that she uses an app that is HIPAA compliant called Spruce. Is that correct, Jory? I'm going to use Dr. Google and find it. Yep, that's what she says, or Jory says.
Yeah, there's plenty of apps out there.
Okay.
There's also the VPN option that you could look at. There are VPNs out there that will make the phone HIPAA compliant and that you can use an app through the VPN to make those calls.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I know there's a lot of angst about what are the schools going to do? What are we going to do with our students who are placed out in their internship and field placements that are closing up, not only in schools, but in clinical mental health settings. And a lot of it flows back to the licensure board. And I think Stacy mentioned that precedents are being set. On the clinical end, we're talking about Ohio. They have basically said, according to their licensure law, counselor trainees, which is a designation for students who are in a training setting or practicum, have the ability to do telemental health. Now, they should be trained, of course, and their supervisors should have some training and knowledge of telemental health, but they can perform services when supervised doing telemental health. They also have said that, it's encouraged that they do video and that they do audio record, but audio recordings will suffice in situations like this. They're making some accommodations for this situation that's going on with the pandemic. They also said in their most recent statement that I read was that, and Stacy can correct me because I know she's from Ohio. They also said that we're not sure what we're going to do with completion of hours. And we're still meeting to discuss these issues. And we haven't figured out what it's going to be and what we're going to do, but it'll probably be dependent on the number of hours that the person has already completed. And there might be different pathways for different people. So we don't have the answers to that. A lot of it's state by state. And so you would have to turn to your state board of education, or you'd have to turn to your state licensing group to find out. But from what we've got in Ohio, they're still trying to figure that out.
Okay, sorry, I was just catching up on some of the chat here, Marty. So we had a suggestion about publishers advertising different test banks, and often they'll have additional resources that you can gather. They're a part of the textbook purchase that go along with your LMS so that you can bring those into your courses. Something to keep in mind is just that sometimes they can be really good, and sometimes they can be really a huge pain. A lot of times those files come in together. They come in as a core or a group in what's called a SCORM compliant package into your LMS. And then you can go in and modify them, but it can be really extensive. Some of these textbooks will give you a test bank full of 100 questions that will then appear as a 100-question test bank that you have to sift through. So sometimes it's a really great resource, but sometimes it can create some practical challenges in your course, and can be a really manual process to sort and sift through. So just something to keep in mind as you use those resources. But I think it's a great idea to make sure that you check those out, particularly to bring in some of those asynchronous types of resources.
Yeah, I've been using MindTap, which is part of the Cengage package, for some of my classes, and I don't bring them into the LMS. I just have students do it directly through the Cengage site, because the importing and the changing and all that is so labor intensive. So I'm trying to access and use those resources the best I can, but I don't try to mix them together. It just seems like a potential confusion. What I've had to go back is reset all of my dates in MindTap, since we're now off a week from what the schedule is.
Mhm. Yeah, it can definitely just be a labor-intensive process if you bring some of those resources in. Some of them will let you separate out the different types of elements you want to bring in. Others, it's just one big course package that then you have to modify in the LMS. So it's just kind of something to keep in mind. So there's different, all kinds of different suggestions, and I appreciate everyone posting here in the chat. There were a couple of questions that came out. One was a question related to how to conduct exams during an online course, and when your students are doing a group project on counseling for different age groups. I might want you to clarify that question, so I'm going to turn your mic on here. Oh, sorry, for whatever reason that's not working.
Hello. Hello.
Oh, we can hear you now. Sorry about that.
Yeah, my name is Aradhna. I am teaching the course of counseling, and I have two separate questions. The first part is, what will be the best way for the exams, upcoming exams for now? I know I'm using a book which is Pearson, and they do have it, but I have to look into it, whether they have the facility to where you learn. I know Blackboard does that, but you learn whether they help out with the online exams or not. And the second part of my question is, uh, the students are planning for last few months group projects where they have created their own questionnaire and selected a topic, and we were planning to go and do the group project with different age groups, but because of no social contacts and no social networking, it will be hard for us to conduct the actual counseling piece of it, which I have to revisit. So I'm just wondering if any suggestions on that front.
Well, to help answer your first question, thinking about, so Pearson has, I think, what's called My Test, which is kind of similar to MindTap, that you can do either within Pearson's resources or you can pull into your LMS. And it's really textbook specific. So it's really going to depend on whether or not that textbook author and that particular textbook offers the types of resources that we're talking about. I've seen them offer full LMS packages and some of them that just offer like traditional paper and pencil exams that you then have to modify. So it's really just in reaching out to them and seeing what you can do there. I think a lot of the consideration that we give in building some of these things for online is looking at how you set up that assessment, your time constraints, the types of resources that you provide students to do that, how those questions are structured. There's a lot less content knowledge and more situational, experiential kind of questions that ask them to make determinations and decisions, as opposed to just that, select the definition of A, B, or C. So, it takes a little bit more pedagogical consideration, and some of those tests and resources you'll find too tend to be those kind of content knowledge assessments that work better in person. So you almost have to do a question by question audit of a lot of those resources. And Marty, I'll see if you wanted to add anything to that as well.
No, I think, there's been some ideas in the chat room here about you can use lockdown browsers, but that still doesn't prevent students from using their textbooks or getting information back, Googling back and forth and getting information from other students. And so some people have just decided not to push the river and just limit the time that they have available, so they don't have time to turn their exams into research projects, that they have to know the information before they get there. And I'm, this is usually I do all of my exams, even with my online classes or hybrid classes, I do them in class because I can keep my eyes on students. And even that, I'm sure, is not foolproof just because I'm watching them. So I'm trying to wrestle with how much do I want to fight and protect that cheating effort if it's going to occur? How much can I really?
Yeah, no,
for groups and for small breakout groups, people are suggesting Teams and Microsoft. That is the platform that our university is pushing, and it's not my favorite experience. And I haven't used it in classes. They're encouraging us to use it. However, every time I've been in a meeting or a committee meeting and they're using it, it never works. So I'm switching and doing most of my work through Zoom because that seems to work well in terms of breakout groups. And possibly setting those rooms up, if you're using an LMS, setting those rooms up for your groups who are working together on a topic where they can go in and meet in that particular room and use that to collaborate with would be an option for them.
Yeah, I really like Bongo for this. It's a tool that's integrated into our LMS. I can create groups, give them topics. They can record themselves or just use it as a meeting space. If they're going to plan an assignment or do any work together collaboratively, a lot of students like to have that meeting space and then be able to record it or take notes within it. There's just a lot of options there for them to be able to collaborate. And it's native. It's in the system they're already used to using. So that helps out quite a bit. I'll agree on the Microsoft Teams front. I haven't had great luck with it. It's supposed to be the what they're pushing now instead of Skype, the replacement for Skype. It does have a lot of really neat options, but it's not as stable in an environment, I've found. So I want to put the call out again. Is there anyone else that wants to share or wants to join the conversation? If you do, just post in the chat and I'm happy to unmute you and bring you in. So great suggestions in the chat, by the way. I really appreciate all the input here.
And I would encourage folks, when you're putting in these suggestions, like we just got one from Karen, and I maybe she's intent was to send it to just the organizers, but when you send it, look at the bottom where it says to all or to the organizers. And this was for Arana. An idea for the group project may be to have students teach the whole group how their ideas would be facilitated and provide their classmate resources to try themselves at a later date. Maybe do a fishbowl testing of how the group would run with their peers. So that was Karen's suggestion. and Scott tells us Zoom has breakout rooms. Yeah, that's if you have a enterprise account. So that's there's some options for that group. Any other questions or suggestions? Maybe some type of software or app that you're using that seems to work well.
While we wait and let folks respond to that, I wanted to respond to the lockdown browser comment too. And just funny because as we were talking, I have my cell phone on the counter or on my desk here. I have two laptops that I work from and a smartwatch. I'm connected in so many places that there's not a real, you know, pedagogically sound way to institute an exam at a distance, right? Um, there's a lot of things you can do to discourage that, but the best thing you can do is put together a sound assessment that requires them to apply the knowledge they've learned rather than to memorize or be able to recite or define it. So that application becomes them really demonstrating their understanding of the material. Snag it for quick screenshots. That's a great suggestion. There's something that I like. I like Screencast-O-Matic. If anybody has ever used that, it limits you to about 15 minutes. Gives you the ability to capture your screen, the webcam, or both. Has some really neat options. I don't generally post anything longer than 15 minutes, so I'm fine with the limit, and it's free. Excuse me. So I really enjoy that one. It doesn't take up any space on your computer. You open it up, record, it saves the recording, and then you can put it anywhere you like. So that's one I really like too. Marty, did you have any other screen capture tools that you wanted to mention
Yeah,
here?
just something I've used for a long time, although I probably use Snagit and other types of screen capture. There's a bunch of them out there, but Zing is also one that is pretty good. And here's the thing with screen capturing. Say you're trying to get a student to learn how to use a new technology, maybe VoiceThread, maybe whatever. Create a screen captured video of it. So instead of having to, and you still might want to type out directions or send them to places where they can get directions on how to use it. But if you can do a 5-minute video to say, this is how you navigate around this, it's really helpful for them. You post the video and then they can learn the technology in a much more faster way. And I've got, can you spell the screen site you mentioned? I guess let me check it.
So it's Screencast-O-Matic. And I think Heidi had just put it in here in the chat as well, if that's the one we're talking about. Or Zing was the other one, right? Yeah, I think it was Zing.
Yeah, I'm looking it up. Oh, excuse me, it's not Zing. Ha! It's Jing. Boy, got to get that straight. It's from
Either way, it's cool.
Well, it's from TechSmith, which also makes Snagit.
Right. Not that you're partial.
Someday we'll all be related, you know.
Yeah. There's a really good question in here. Do you have any tips on how to navigate sensitive topics such as multicultural counseling and ethics virtually? I think it's a really good question. When we tend to look at these more sensitive topics, we know that what's conveyed in text is different than how it can be perceived in person, right? It's these etiquette rules we learn about email and all of those things. So when we think about the types of things that we do, in an online space, we want to create spaces for these to be really meaningful conversations and a lot more asynchronous opportunities, I think, for things like ethics and multiculturalism and diversity, so that we can have those conversations and that there's not this hidden and implied meaning in the words that we send out in text. Not to mention we need those meaningful conversations. So creating that space is really important. I think and at the same time expressing that etiquette with students and having them have an understanding that this is a place where they need to be able to grow and express, but also the dangers in doing so when it comes to being able to communicate what you mean in written form. A lot of our discussions all of our discussions actually at Southern New Hampshire University is video based. So everything is at least their initial post is video. Some of the responses are text based, but we provide that space for them to be able to do that. And Shannon had talked about the limit for screencast-o-matic, so I wanted to mention that too. Again, we had talked about it being really important to give students smaller bites of information, smaller videos, and to break that down, as attention can really kind of wane at about 11 or 12 minutes in terms of an asynchronous activity. And video would be one of those asynchronous activities, right? So I just saw it there in the chat and wanted to hit on that. Thank you, Marty. But in terms of the multicultural class and some of those more sensitive topics, I think having those options for synchronous activity and synchronous conversations is really, really important. Marty, did you have anything to add to that?
I think it's going to be tougher because those difficult conversations are going to be tougher because there are some limits to this medium. I think students are better at it than we are in a lot of ways in terms of assessing what the meta communication is that's going on. So you're going to have to remind people to be gentle, remind people to think about their reaction and where their reactions might be coming from if they feel like they are misinterpreting or have been misinterpreted. These are, I think it's a challenge to teach a multicultural class face to face. That to let alone to teach it online and be able to get a sense of what's going on with individual respondents and how they communicate that. So I don't envy you.
Yeah, there's no doubt that it's a tougher conversation. It's a tougher way to go about things. The medium has its limitations. I think just making sure that you have more opportunity for the types of experiences that will allow you to engage in as much of a face-to-face type process as you can is best. So let's see. There's some talk about scaffolding and thinking about the types of different things we might do with video. Any additional questions? Anyone want to, again, jump on and talk a little bit with the group? So there's another question that it says, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about working with clients, counselors with visual and or hearing disabilities via this portal. Marty, what are your thoughts on that?
I've worked with some visually impaired doctoral students. I don't know what kinds of there are screen readers that people use, that students have used, and they come in handy for them to be able to read text when the platform itself allows that to occur. And I can't speak to hearing disabilities, but if you're talking about complete deafness, inability to hear, then looking at ways in which you can provide as much transcription as possible for the services that you're going to be doing. We have a student accessibility service office that when I teach certain courses and particularly when I have people with visual or hearing impairment, they have to go into full gear to deal with some of my material. I appreciate that. They want me to send it to them ahead of time. And because of that, it's very time consuming for them. I'm sure they didn't anticipate that a pandemic was going to be coming. I've just received an email between the last webinar and this webinar that our student accessibility office is going to be working remotely. So the idea of them proctoring exams, not going to happen. The idea of them, they're going to be there available for consultation, but I doubt they're going to be there to be able to do the kinds of transcription work that they've done in the past. So it's going to be a mess.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on it are always the same. This is not my it's not my area of expertise. So, you know, in terms of course development and which we're focusing on in particular, I'm very quick to reach out to the accessibility office to have my course reviewed, the assignments that I do reviewed, to talk about the types of tools and resources they might have for students. You know, I always make that a part of my initial course announcement in talking about accommodations and what students might need and where they can go for that. You know, I obviously I want my course to be accessible to everyone. So, you know, I try and be proactive about that, but there's going to be situations in which we're going to find things that need to be adapted, and that's the place to go for resources. You know, depending on your institution, there's a lot of generally there's going to be dedicated software for, you know, screen reading and visual impairment and those types of things. So I think it's a really good idea to make one of your first phone calls to that office as you're starting to develop your coursework.
Eric, do you know if the LMS are screen readable?
Yeah, generally.
Okay.
So I can speak to at least Canvas and Desire to Learn. Both can be used with a couple of different ones. I believe DragonSpeak works with both. There's a few others, but you know, I've had some experience with students using those with those two LMSs. I'm not entirely sure about Blackboard, but I would imagine as a major LMS so that it would be compatible as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just, in some cases, I was going to suggest maybe taking your material out of the LMS and putting it on a service or a website, like maybe Google Sites, something like that in terms of content, where it might be more easily screen readable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great idea.
We're getting some suggestions coming up in here from Joey about get the office accommodations. They can provide an interpreter for a deaf student. They would sign on and provide video relay, so you could utilize communication, access real-time translation. So yeah, invite a person who does sign to your class.
Yeah, I've done that once. With a student, I worked at Presley Ridge in Pittsburgh and had one of the interpreters I regularly worked with help me out. But you know, there are services in particular that you can sign up for that will assist.
And Kay, Alexandra, no, there is no video at this moment for this. This is just an open conversation with folks using this platform. So no PowerPoints, things like that.
So just as a reminder, we will be sharing what we found here. The video will be shared and posted on the website within the next day or two. All four of the sessions that we currently have planned, we hope to post on the website, as well as joining Slack. Slack is a collaborative platform that Marty's put in here a couple of times and is also available in your materials as a part of this. You can join Slack to talk, to share, and really just connect with one another. We've set up some hashtags there for different conversations so that you can get on and chat and see what everyone has to offer. And again, really just connect with one another. So here's a question, more of a statement. It says, I'm considering various ways to engage students online in order to meet federal regs and school time requirements for credit hours. So there's a lot that you can do when you plan your course. If you want to be mindful of hours of instruction and plan that out, right? The easiest method that I found, particularly when translating a traditional course with no flipped or hybrid elements to it, is to take those hours to look at those different assignments and different activities that you would do in the course and think about how you might break those down in an online environment, still considering the types of time and effort involved by the students to participate in them, and think about pedagogically how they fit into that online environment. We talked a little bit about lecture and demonstrations and those types of things, and how those might fit into the course, right? So you're still doing a lot of the same things, but you're changing the approach and how students are going to access this in order to meet those hours. So when you're looking at how that translates in an online environment, they're still spending the same amount of time reading. They might still be spending the same time collaborating if you're giving them a group assignment and some medium to do that in. They're still listening to your lectures, even though you might be breaking that down into 10 or 15-minute segments for them to listen to or hear. They're still recording their videos, their discussion posts. So you need to look at that again, much in the same way that you might look at your 3 hours in classroom a night, and try and break that down into your weeks. So just some ideas in how you start to plan what that might look like. Marty, did you have anything else you wanted to add in terms of just how to make those hours?
Really, it's for me in a lot of classes, I'm teaching a group class, so I have to have group meeting hours where they typically in the class meet in small groups for an hour. And then a lot of the other material I'm shifting asynchronously, primarily because we are restricted to these hours that we have in order to teach the class. And I think students are appreciative of that to a degree, that they can do it all asynchronously, or most of it asynchronously, except for their group hours. Other classes we're going to do a little bit more synchronous type of work with, in terms of simultaneous small groups meeting and then reconverging as a larger group to process as a treatment team. So it varies depending on what your intent with the course is, of how you're going to balance out the actual synchronous work, on-time work, and what you would consider out-of-class work. The rule of thumb, of course, is that you spend 3 hours studying for every hour that you spend in class. I don't think that when they do the research on it, I think it's closer to 15 minutes. So I don't know if it's a fair gauge to use that anymore.
Yeah, I don't think it is either. And I think a lot of the literature in terms of instructional design and how we look at building courses, it definitely doesn't resonate anymore. But in terms of your planning and what you might look at to transition that course from an on-ground to an online, you would be surprised at how much of that can really be transitioned into a different type of activity that meets those same aims with the same type of time requirement. As much as 90 or 95% of what you might do might be able to be transitioned in that way. Again, you're changing your pedagogy, you're changing your approach, but you're not necessarily changing what those learning outcomes are and the strategies to meet them in terms of what you're doing. And like Marty said, the content, the topic of your course is going to drive a lot of that, right? Because you might have existing requirements for how much you need to meet to practice or engage. So we're at about 4:15. Wanted to check in with everyone to see if anybody else wanted to share or wanted to ask a question that they've been waiting to hear about. While we're doing that, I want to encourage you to visit acesonline.net. We're going to be, again, posting these videos there, the resources that we found from the chat. I hope that it inspired some conversation and hope that the Slack website inspires you to stay connected. Marty said something I thought was really intriguing during the last webinar. He said that a lot of us will probably be talking about what we did during the coronavirus outbreak. And I think at this point, my response would be that I supported my fellow faculty, my fellow counselor educators, and played entirely too much Mario Kart because my kids are at home, and that's kind of what we're going with right now. That's our R&R.
Well, I've been told that I can't expand my office in my son's old room, that I need to move everything to my daughter's old room, clean that room out, and then I can expand my office. So that's my goal over this time. But I do hope to remember this period of time as a meaningful and reflective time where we took care of each other in the process, that we helped each other out, that it wasn't us giving all the answers to you, but everybody working together. Those are things that I hope 5 years from now, when I look back at this, that this is how I see how we responded as a group.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I want to thank everyone for joining us, for offering your suggestions and ideas. We really look forward to posting this for everyone to see and to share. We hope we see you on Slack, and if you care to join us, there are 2 more times on Wednesday that you're welcome to come on and speak with us. Want to wish everyone a great evening and stay safe.